Fox News, and I am so excited because I have this today. Yes, I have it in my hands. This is my book. It is like having a baby, except far less painful. And it has finally hit stores today. Last night I went to bed thinking, oh, they're loading all of the books onto the shelves, and people are actually going to hold them in their hands tomorrow morning. And sure enough, I hope you are. If you aren't, go to the link at the top of this page and order one right now. Settle for More is the name of it. And you are joining me for a Facebook First Reads. This is the first time I'm actually going to read my book to you. I mean, I've read it myself, but I haven't read it, like, aloud. So I'm going to read it aloud. It's a dramatic reading. My motivation for this scene is I was an unhappy lawyer. And this book, just so you know, is about, there's made a lot of news for, there's a small chapter or two on Trump. There's a little chapter on some problems we had here at Fox News. But the vast majority of this book is about improving your life. And what I hope you'll take away from it is, if you feel unhappy, if you feel blue, if you feel like you can do better than where you are now, you will hopefully be able to look at this story and say, she did it and I can do it too. And it also is a testament to American values, I think: hard work, perseverance, resilience, and things that the cupcake generation seems to be losing sight of, but hopefully we are not losing sight of, and we can all do better. Okay, so let me set this up for you, what I'm going to read. Settle for More. I talk in the book about near-death experience is not too dramatic for what happened to me on an airplane flight one time. And, I mean, we almost went down. And I am a bad flyer to begin with, and this was a particularly bad flight where the stewardess was thrown down in the middle of the aisle. She was crawling up to the flight attendant, crawling up to the front of the plane. I'm holding on to the old lady next to me. Opposing counsel's like in the back, reaching forward to me, and I'm reaching back to him. We're holding each other. Everyone's holding. We're thinking we're going to go down. And we lived. Okay? So that's where we have left off when we pick up here on page 105, if you're following along at home. Thank you, Dion. Dion's here.
And it's in the notes section, too.
That's in the notes section. Okay. As is often the case, it's the rare near-death experience that actually forces you to reevaluate your life. These things are traumatic, but they're so packed with adrenaline that it's more cinematic than life-changing. Rather, my awakening came from something far more, for lack of a better word, innocuous: a trip home to see my mom. I had been working myself into a frenzy. This is as a lawyer. Billing more than 3,000 hours a year. The better you are as a lawyer, the more work gets loaded on you as a reward. As they say, working in law is like a pie-eating contest in which the prize is more pie, which is about when I realized just because you're good at something doesn't mean it makes you happy. It sounds so obvious now, but for most of my adult life, I'd been chasing success with such single-minded determination that I hadn't thought much about my long-term goals, only about acing each new challenge as it came. I'd come of age believing so strongly in the value of hard work, and it had paid off for me many times already. Only now was I starting to see that I had taken it too far. There was nothing wrong with working hard, but without a plan, it was more like running in a hamster wheel than running towards some place I wanted to be. Mom, I said, why don't you meet me at the racetrack in Saratoga? I suggested to her before boarding my plane home. I'll call you when I land and tell you when I'm there, or where I am. When I arrived in Saratoga, I went to a restaurant and called Mom. She didn't answer her phone, so I left a message. I'm here, I said. I'll wait for you at the restaurant. I waited and waited, and still she didn't show up. I called again, left another message. An hour passed. On the third call, Mom finally answered her phone. Mom, where have you been? I said. I've left you 2 messages. You didn't leave me any messages, she said. I've been right here waiting to hear from you. It took a minute, but then I figured out what had happened. I had called my own answering machine in Chicago. On my voicemail were the messages I had meant to leave for my mother. That meant I had listened to my own voice. You've reached Megan and Dan, leave a message and we'll call you back. And then left messages for my mother. Twice. It was a little bit like coming to consciousness, covered in blood, standing over a dead body. So startled was I by how checked out I had become. Clearly, I was operating in a kind of fugue state. My body was out there, moving around in the world, but without much of a connection to my brain. I was dissociated from my own life. It was in that moment that I knew with total certainty that things had to change. I had to improve my life. Sitting in that restaurant near the racetrack, I had to admit to myself I wanted to leave the practice of law, just as that man in the taxi had predicted. I hated the anger, hated the hours, hated what I had become. Yes, I was making money. I had friends at the office, but I had to sacrifice everything else. Family time, time with Dan, that was my first husband, reading books, seeing friends, travel, giving back. I felt like I'd lost so much time. These should have been wonderful years, but they weren't. I knew I had so much more to offer. I enjoyed talking with other people, hearing and telling stories, solving problems, traveling. I wanted to do something creative, not just argue, dodge, provoke, and compete. The verdict was in. The money and prestige were not worth the sacrifices. That night, back at my mother's, I sat on her couch and wrote in my journal, I am more exciting than this. I am more interesting than this. I am more interested than this. I need more out of life. Just as an aside, I also actually include that journal page in the pictures of my book. Here's a quick flash, boom. And I actually have many pages from my actual journals over the years in this book, which are kind of fun to read and slightly embarrassing. Then I wrote down one of the most important commitments I've ever made to myself. I will be out of the law by this time next year. I knew this time that I didn't need to move to another firm or to another city. I needed to move to another profession. That is a watershed moment for any professional person. I had spent 7 years pursuing an education that would let me do this job, and more than 7 actually doing it. I knew I was going to make partner at Jones Day at the youngest age possible. That meant a lot to me. It was a feather in my cap. But I knew I couldn't stay just to get that feather. For one thing, it would be taking the opportunity away from someone else. For another, I knew that if I took it, I would have to stay at least a couple of years. I simply did not have that kind of time left in me at that job. Everything in my life looked great on paper. I was a lawyer. My husband was a doctor. He was kind and supportive. I might not see much of him, but I knew he cared for me. We had great friends. It was more than anyone had ever hoped for me. How could I not be happy? How could I not feel whole? But I wasn't, and I didn't. I felt miserable, and I thought to myself, hurry up, you're dying. Around this time, I found myself mesmerized by midnight reruns of Oprah, eating microwaved lean cuisines after yet another endless day of brutal litigation. I would watch her talk about living our best lives. It was almost as if her words were coming to me from another planet, so little did my frantic, empty life resemble the considered one she described. She spoke about how we are all one decision away from changing our lives. And then one night, her guest, Dr. Phil, said something that made me drop my fork. The only difference between you and someone you envy is you settled for less. It was as if he were describing my exact situation. It looked from the outside like I had everything anyone wanted, but I knew in my heart that I was settling for less. Less than I had to offer, less than I deserved. I wanted love and freedom and creativity and adventure. I wanted friendship, time to think and feel, a sense that I was making a difference in the world, food that did not come out of a frozen box. It was so simple, but so clear to me. This was the moment when I realized I could change my life. I did not have to settle for less. I could settle for more. Getting a little emotional. Thank you. Oh, thank you. And hence the name of the book and what became my life philosophy. And that's something that's driven me ever since. And you see it in the pages of my journal over the years, asking myself, how can I settle for more personally? How can I settle for more professionally? And always tweaking it more and more and more. Anyway, I want to take some of your questions now. Enough about me. What do you think of me? Lisa Sharkey, who basically runs the show over at HarperCollins, is here. She helped me put this book together, and she's got some questions from all of you. And we're taking your questions right now, if you want to submit.
And we have 4,000 people watching live from all over the world.
4,000 people from all over the world. Yeah, welcome. Welcome.
Facebook.
Great to have you.
So here's a great question from Jody Miner Yates. She says, is it hard to balance